চলো এখানে বসো, এই ল্যাপটপ চলো, চুপচাপ এই স্ক্রিনটা খুলে নিয়ে বসতে আর কিচ্ছু করতে হবে না।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে
ম্যাডামকে ফোন করে বলো দেখি,
ম্যাডাম।
বলো লাইভ হচ্ছে, স্টার্ট হয়েছে, কোনটা আমরা দেখাবো। কোনটা নেই, আমি কল করে নিচ্ছি।
ওইটা ওখানে যে সাউন্ডটা ওর একদম এটা খুলে রেখেছি, ওখানে সাউন্ডটা ওখানে আসছে, মাইকটা
এটা
খোলা।
একটা প্রিয়াঙ্কা ঘোষ না, ও অনিন্দ, আচ্ছা অনিন্দার কথা লাগি না, আচ্ছা 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 আচ্ছা, 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 আচ্ছা। এই ছুটে যাও 7 নম্বর রুমে, 7 নম্বর রুম, ওই যে নিচে সংসদের পাশে, ওখানে লগ আউট করবে সিস্টেম থেকে। দাঁড়া দাঁড়া, ম্যাডাম কি বলছে? হ্যাঁ হ্যালো, হয়েছে, কাজ হয়েছে, লাইভ হচ্ছে। কোনটা দেখাবো আমরা, এখন তো কিছু স্টার্ট হয়নি। আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে করুন। হ্যাঁ 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 হ্যাঁ, কে কে ডিআর, হ্যাঁ ওইটা ওইটা, ওকে ওকে ঠিক আছে ঠিক আছে, হ্যাঁ 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 চলুন, আমরা লাইভ হচ্ছে, আপনার করুন। তারপর যেতে বসে দেখি।
Yes, Hello everyone. Hi, I'm Madhuri, and here we are waiting for Sonali to join in because she's having some trouble with the internet. So we will just wait for her for 5 minutes, for 2-3 minutes, not 5, right? If that works well. If that doesn't, then we'll start. Sure?
Yeah.
We're good to go, right? So we'll just start in 2-3 minutes. I'm just waiting for Sonali to join in.
Okay. Okay.
Perfect.
এখানে করতে হবে কোনো টুয়ে ছিল টুয়ে
আমাকে এটা একটু সেন্ড করে দেবে।
এর টাইমটা একটু ভুলভাল করে দিয়েছি আর কি।
ওইটাই তো, আমার পাঠা লিংকটা কপি করে।
না এটা না, এটা তো মেমোরি হওয়ার কথা।
Good afternoon, madam.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay.
Should I start or not?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay. Very good afternoon to all of you. I, Shauram Kubartai, on behalf of CHANDRAKONA VIDYASAGAR MAHAVIDYALAYA, would like to welcome you all in this session. And this is the first day of International and Interdisciplinary Conference on Globalization, Impact on Society, Culture and Education, organized by VIDYASAGAR MAHAVIDYALAYA, collaboration with the Institute for Cross-Cultural Studies and Academic Exchange, Burlington, NC, USA. Wherein is God's plenty, and the objective being refers to the variety and the abundance of the characters in Joshua's secondary tales. And at this crucial juncture, we are indeed blessed with God's plenty and looking forward to getting enlightened with thought-provoking deliberations from eminent speakers. To start the proceeding, I would like to introduce Dr. Sonali Dr. Roy, who will be chairing this session. Dr. Roy is currently associated with Department of English, St. Xavier's University, as assistant professor. She had MA and PhD from JNU. She worked on Bangla sports fiction of Moti Nundi for her doctoral dissertation. Her areas of research interest are popular culture and media, genre studies, and crime writing. Thank you, madam, for gracing this session with your presence. Over to you, madam.
এই যে যখন বলে দেবো ওভার টু ইউ তখন চলে যাবে। ইনাকে পিং করো, ইনাকে আনপিং করো।
আচ্ছা, অসুবিধা নেই। আচ্ছা, আনপিন তো ওখান থেকে হবে না, ওই যে মাঝখান থেকে।
কথা বলো, আচ্ছা আচ্ছা। ও এটা পিন হলো।
হ্যাঁ,
ম্যাডাম হেল্প করো।
ঠিক আছে।
ঠিক আছে,
আচ্ছা,
ইউটিউব লিঙ্কটা পাঠা, পাওয়ার টেবিলটা পাওয়ার দিতে হবে।
I think
টেবিলটা
some network issue is there. Madam, am I audible?
Well, I guess, Shonalidi, you need to switch on your audio and switch off your video. I think that ways it will work.
I think some network issue are there.
on তার নেটওয়ার্ক ইস্যু।
Okay, so without kind of wasting any time, let me have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Srimanto Das. Am I audible?
Yeah, perfectly.
All right, all right. So, Dr. Srimanto Das is an assistant professor at Bidhannagar College, and he finished his doctorate from Rabindra Bharati University. And he's a writer, he is a poet, a man of many
ইউটিউব না,
talents and interests, and I'm so happy that he is here with us, and he will be talking about Kalidasa's prophetic voice, Abhigyana Shakuntalam, in the context of eco-critical studies and globalization. Srimantala, the dice is all yours. You know, it would be wonderful if you could turn your camera towards a little yourself, because we're not able to see you.
সেটা স্ক্রিন হবে।
A little muffled.
Now it's better.
Yeah, this is better.
You see, first I should thank you, Professor Shaman Amadri, for giving me this opportunity to participate in this seminar. Before I start reading my paper, well,
লিংকটা না পাঠালে ম্যাডামকে বলো তো, না লিংকটা না পাঠালে শিডিউলে কি লিংক ছিল?
Here the abstract mentioned that Abhignana Shakuntala was about 500 years in the industry.
Your voice is breaking.
1500 years ago. Is it clear now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I do have connectivity issues here, so I guess it might be a problem, but I'll try my best to sort it out. Anyways, so I'll start with my paper. Biodiversity loss and preservation of the environment are ideas that have become dominant in discussions related to impacts of globalization,
ম্যাডামের কাছেই তো দিন।
ecological studies.
ইউটিউব লিংক স্ক্যান করবে নাকি?
Trade today involves aggressive use of machinery and technology and has
স্ক্যান করলে
catastrophic
কি আসবে? আসবে না?
consequences for the environment. As a consequence, the academic wing of global commerce keeps pondering on concepts that would enable sustainable development. Studies claim that environmental problem began with the industrial revolution in Europe in and around the 19th
সাউন্ডটা কেমন আসছে দেখো, আমি সাউন্ডটা বন্ধ করব।
century. Even from the ancient eras, there's evidence
সাউন্ডটা
that
একটু দেখে বলো। আমি এখানে
probably at
সাউন্ডটা
the
বন্ধ
time
করব,
when
তারপর
man began seeing nature not just as the opposite of
মেশিনটা অন আছে
civilization,
তো?
but as a resource to be plundered
ঠিক আছে,
or
ওটা খুলো,
seized.
স্ক্রিনটা খুলো। হ্যাঁ
And
ঠিক আছে।
such poetry has also been
থেকে
prophetic about the need for living
কি বলছিস?
sustainably. Time has probably arrived when academia should dissolve the
কি
boundaries
খুলছে না
and
বলছো?
separate
ওই লিংকটা সেট
academia and
করছেন
science,
অন্য কিছু
and
দেখাচ্ছে
even look for ideas in each other's domain.
এই যে
In the context of globalization
এখানে কি
studies,
দেখাবে?
eco-criticism is
টাইটেলটা বলুন না।
significance for obvious reasons.
তুমি পাবে না এরকম টাইটেল,
আচ্ছা ওই
Is the opportunity
আপনি
to
জাতক একদম
explore
সামান্য
a text
থেকে
from
কারণ ম্যাডামকে তো পাঠানো
Indian
হয়েছে, ম্যাডামের কাছে আছে,
classical
তুমি ম্যাডামকে এই করতে, তোমাদের কারোকে শেয়ার করতে
ম্যাডাম তো
হবে।
হোস্টিং করছে ওই
হয়ে গেছে, ম্যাডাম
Consider
কথা বলে
how the
দিয়েছে,
early
ইনি
stages of
বলছেন, এখন
ancient
ম্যাডাম কিছু বলছে না, তুমি
civilization
পাঠাও, তুমি বলো একটা
anticipated
লিঙ্কটা স্টুডেন্টকে
man's
শেয়ার করতে।
alienation
ম্যামকে
from
বলো
nature.
ম্যামকে
Jonathan Bate in
তুমি
Son
বলো না,
of
অসুবিধা
the
নেই,
Earth
লিঙ্কটা দিই।
considers the
আমাকে
beginning of industrialization as the
আমাকে
starting
ম্যাডামের ফোন
point
লাগবে
of
না
man's
সাউন্ডটা বন্ধ
conflict
করবো
with
আমি।
the environment. It is true that industrial waste
এইটা না
made
এটা না এটা না
evident
আরেকটা আছে না
how much
কিউ কাছে যেতে
human activities were against nature, but the alienation between man and nature actually can be traced back to the early stages of any human civilization. Clashes, clashes between human and natural forces,
ম্যাম
some of them
ম্যাম
again human, are common
ম্যাম
in ancient
বিলটা
epics
শেয়ার
and other
করতে
forms of literature. Uh, in
লাইভ
Vedas, the Mahabharata,
হচ্ছে
there are multiple
তো ওটা
instances where
শেয়ার করার
civilized
জন্য
men
দিতে
clash
হবে
against both
আপনাকে এটা
human
দিয়ে দিয়েছেন
and
আপনি
non-human
লিখে দিয়ে
natural
দেবেন
forces. Bhima's fight with Hirim
গ্রুপে
and
এখন
other
ভলেন্টিয়ার গ্রুপে
demons
দিয়ে দেবো
must be interpreted as a civilized man's
আচ্ছা
encounters with forest dwellers, tribals. Arjuna
ওকে
setting fire to a forest to
শেয়ার
construct
করেছে?
Indraprastha is actually an act of deforestation
লাইভটা শেয়ার
common
করতে
in
হবে না
early
জাস্ট
stages of
চেক করতে হবে লাইভটা
civilization.
ঠিকঠাক করে হচ্ছে নাকি চেক করে
Even in the
জাস্ট ওকে লিংকটা দিয়ে দিলে
epic
হচ্ছে
লিঙ্ক কি
Beowulf, the
ম্যাডাম দিয়েছেন
hero's
দেখে না দেন?
tales
না
of
না
monsters and
তখন
dragons
আমি কি করে
are
দেবো
also
হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে
instances
ডাইরেক্ট,
of
নাম্বার
man
বলো।
taming the animal
85
world. Now, in this paper, I will attempt to highlight some
বারকোড চেক
aspects
করেন
of
তো
Kalidasa's
বারকোড,
হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ
Abhignana
বারকোড
Shakuntalam
হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ বারকোড
that
করে কি
throws
করবো?
light on
আমার
the
কন্ট্যাক্ট থেকে আপনি
man-nature
ডাইরেক্ট চলে আসতে পারবেন।
conflict. I
হোয়াটসঅ্যাপে
believe
ডাইরেক্ট,
that
তাই তো?
Kalidasa is one Indian poet
এই তো
who should hold an important place in discussions regarding
দিয়ে
man's relationship with
স্ক্যান
the
স্ক্যান
environment
স্ক্যান করুন
because
কি
much
স্ক্যান
স্ক্যান
of
কিউআর
his
আপনার ইয়েতে
opinions
যান
are
না, হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ সেটিংসে যান, সেটিংস ওখানে দেখুন কিউআর কোডে হাত দিলে উপরে কিউআর কোডটা আছে, হ্যাঁ ওখানে দেখুন স্ক্যান কোড বলে একটা অপশন আছে।
Kalidasa's play Lucian is
ওকে ওকে করুন ওকে
usually introduced as a hunter,
হয়েছে, তাই তো?
but he is a king for whom hunting is not necessity but pleasure.
হয়ে গেল, এবার এখন তোমাকে
He
লিঙ্কটা দেবো।
encourages the interpretation that humans exploiting nature and its resources through activities like hunting continue well beyond the stage where it was deemed
কি
necessary.
নামে হলো তোমার যেন?
রামরোহন
His friends
রাম।
say
আর এম রামরোহন কথা হচ্ছে রেডি টু গো।
pious groves are in the protection of the king.
বাস আমাকে দিয়ে চেক কর
Technically, Lucian owns the forest, but he must not exploit it.
দেখা যাচ্ছে আমি সাউন্ডটা বন্ধ করবো তারপর।
A hermit reminds him of his duty as a king. A king's duty is not about looking after his human subjects only. The well-being of the environment, along with all the life forms it supports, is also the king's
সাউন্ড শুনতে পাচ্ছ?
responsibility. For Dushyant, it is an act
হচ্ছে
of
না?
remembrance and not realization. The hermit says, thanks again.
ভিডিও অন
To you were this land, the broken-hearted deliver, not strike the innocent. Now, Dushyant is neither a bad king nor a bad man. He puts his bow down almost immediately. It is a well-known fact that the play's main motive involves the acts of remembering. And this motive is not limited to
এই
Dushyant
তো চলছে,
remembering his wife Shakuntala. This is where
লাইভ তো চলছে,
Kalidasa's treatment of the story differs from
চলছে।
the source text, the Mahabharata. The play is also about Dushyant remembering his responsibilities towards nature. Once Dushyant marries Shakuntala, he forgets her, and the ring reminds him. Now, I will argue that Shakuntala in the play is almost synonymous with nature. Kalidasa implies that it is the curse of the civilized man that he will keep forgetting his relationship with nature. This curse is simply a fiction.
কাজে
This difference is significant
ইকো
and
হবে না,
clearly
গুগল মিটের
difficult
ইকোতে
to
জয়েন করতে
bridge.
হবে।
এমনিতেও ইকো
The
হবে
natural
ব্লুটুথ দিয়ে
setting
দিলে
and the
ইকো
palace are so utterly dissimilar that Dushyant acts differently in the two spaces.
মাইক বন্ধ করে দাও।
Dushyant
এই কাছে
is
কাছে
the monarch of
টিভির
Hastinapur,
কাছে
and it should be easy enough to treat his
গাড়ি গাড়ি
character
কাছে
এবার দেখো
as
দেখি।
the representative of civilization.
হ্যাঁ
Monarchs were closely associated with
ওর
natural
লিংকটা আলাদা হতে
resources
পারে
like
লিংক যেটা ইয়ে
land,
করবে
rivers, and even human resources. And power often was a product of the amount of land and other resources possessed by the king. In the play, he is initially the invader, the hunter, for whom killing a deer is a pleasure, but also prove that he is functioning as a civilized man. As the king, killing a deer is like mutilating a subject of his own, one without voice, to display his power and masculinity. But what he encounters in the forest kindles his desire, a woman whom he wishes to possess and not mutilate. Kalidasa probably suggests that this is the only transformation possible for the civilized man, to love nature as a possession. Instead of mutilating the resources for his pleasure, he could love them, but by
একটু ডিলে
only
হচ্ছে তাই তো
but only after possessing.
I'm sorry, I have to play the devil's advocate. You may have to wrap up in the next 5 minutes.
Yes. Now, Shakuntala represents nature not just because she dwells in the hermitage. Actually, every dimension of her existence, right from her birth to her adoption and later seduction, is deeply embedded in nature and myths about nature. Shakuntala is time and again compared with flowers. In the benediction itself, the actress sings, "Flowers like these are kissed by eager bees." This song is about virgins in general, but in Act 1 we find a bee hovering around Shakuntala's face as if it considers her to be a flower. The bee belongs to the world of nature, but is still a hostile force. Her friend also compares her with the jasmine. Shakuntala considers the plants as her sisters and tells her friends that the mango tree speaks to her. But the metaphors employed here are worth examining deeply. If Shakuntala is the jasmine vine, then she desires to draw sustenance from the mango, but Dushyant desires her like
কটার
a
লিঙ্ক
bee.
চলছে 1:55 তাই তো
The cunning usage of the natural imagery here suggests that marriage with Dushyant will not be able to sustain Shakuntala. Now, from the perspective of ecological studies, it is important to note that there are two dimensions that need to be explored. The first one is the model of sustainable existence as expressed in Converse hermitage, and the other is the marriage of Shakuntala and Dushyant, which arguably is an allegory for the relationship between man and nature. Dushyant initially is portrayed as the plunderer of natural resources. However, he metamorphoses into a lover of nature once he gets infatuated with Shakuntala's beauty. One significant reason that explains Dushyant's failure to recognize Shakuntala is that she is so much a part of her environment. The palace is a different setting, and once Shakuntala is outside her natural setting, recognizing her becomes difficult for Dushyant. Kanva's hermitage is an example of man-nature coexistence where Shakuntala, Kanva's adopted child, and the plants are treated as equals. Shakuntala treats the plants as her sisters, and even when she contemplates marriage, her fantasy involves plants. She desires a husband who would sustain her as the mango
মনে হয়
tree
অন্য কিছু পাঠিয়েছেন
sustains the jasmine vines.
পরেরটা কিছু বাদ পড়ে গেছে
Comparison can be drawn between Kanva's hermitage and the garden in Dushyant's palace.
অন্য একটা মেশিনে খুলতে হবে
Is the
কি ওখানে ঠিক আছে
একটা তো ভালোই চলছে মাঝে মধ্যে অডিও ঠিক আছে
কোনটা কোনটা
live like
চলছে
The palace garden is
আচ্ছা শোনো
nature
এইটাতে তাহলে আড়াইটা থেকে হবে
আচ্ছা
এফএক্সজেড
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
for the king.
এটা তাহলে স্ট্রিমিংটা ঠিক আছে
স্ট্রিমিংটা কি এখানে প্যারালালি করব
And the garden
হ্যাঁ
is
প্যারালালি করে দাও তাহলে
Dushyant
সাউন্ডটা ইউটিউব চলছে দেখতে পাচ্ছ
হ্যাঁ
ইউটিউব
superiority of
ইউটিউবটা
his
আবার
garden
খুলিনি
in act
খুলো দেখি
and
আমি তোমাকে লিংকের
mentions
এটা পাঠাচ্ছি
from the text.
এই এমন
Is there
সমস্যা
any denying woodland vines far
আমাদের তো
surpass
লিঙ্ক শুধু
those nurtured
তোরা
gardens?
ওখানে ওখানে থেকে দেখি
It
ওখান
is
থেকে লগ ইন করো
interesting
তো
to note that
সিস্টেম
Bharata, the child of nature and civilization, Dushyant and
তুমি সেখানে
Shakuntala,
ডিসপ্লে করবে
is
না
portrayed as
হ্যাঁ?
one
ডিসপ্লে
playing
কোথায়?
with a lion cub and
একটা
harassing
তো ডিসপ্লে হচ্ছে তো
and that proclaims
হচ্ছে
in a loud
আরেকটা
voice
আরেকটা
that
চালিয়ে
man's
দিয়ে এসছি
mastery over nature is
আর এটা দেখে
probably
আমি তোমাকে আমি লিংকগুলো শেয়ার করছি দেখো
relationship
দেখি
that would, exist, say, in the future. The sages have even named him Sarvadamana, which means somebody who claims everything. Kalidasa, however, criticizes this aggressive behavior through the words of
এটা কি
the
ডাউন রেকর্ডেড
আছে অলরেডি
এটা কি রেকর্ডেড
says,
কোনটা
"Only you
লাইভ
not
চলছে
না,
only
live
why
চলছে।
you heard our
আমি তোমাকে
arguments,
এ পাঠালাম
যেটা হচ্ছে আমাদের নিউ বিল্ডিং এ হচ্ছে
but that is also Kalidasa's prophecy. The civilized man can
আমি তোমাকে এই
freely
পাঠিয়েছি দেখো দেখি
এটা নিউ বিল্ডিং এ হচ্ছে
তুমি
best
ইউটিউবে
to
দেখো
draw
এই
Bharata's attention to the threats of nature symbolized by the
যে এটা
lioness,
পাঠালাম
but the
ব্রাউজারটা খুলো
unholy and rather aggressive
ব্রাউজার
Shah
বলছি হ্যাঁ
pays
ওয়ার্ডটা
very
খুলো
little
ওয়ার্ডের
attention
লিংকগুলো
to
পেস্ট
her,
আছে
much to the delight of Dushyant, who can only appreciate the child's attitude. Kalidasa
এইটাতে
implies
আমরা
that
ডেসক্রিপশনে
man
যেন
can only
পলিটিক্সটা
share
অ্যাড করি
an exploitative
পলিটিক্সটা অ্যাড
relationship
করে
with
দিলে খুব
nature.
ভালো হয়।
Converse, hermitage is not a
দাঁড়াও
model
দাঁড়াও
that can be
অল
sustained
অ্যাক্টিভিটি
once
নয়টা
civilization
থেকে করো
flourishes. If
পরে
Bharata is
কি
the
থেকে
future, then man is going to
করো
be the master of nature, waiting to plunder its resources for his own benefit, unless
ডেসক্রিপশনে পরের লিংকটা
he
যদি অ্যাটাচ
learns
করি
to take
কোনটা
care of
কোনটা
it.
বলে লাস্ট
And
পরের লিংকটা
নিচে 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 আইটিসির 4 তারিখে অ্যাক্টিভিটি লিংক
Thank you so much.
4 তারিখে তো
So
তিনটে ইউটিউব লিংক
I
দিয়েছে
think Dr. Das may have to leave. He has some other engagement from 2 o'clock, I suppose. So if anyone has any questions for Dr. Das, please feel free to ask. You can raise your hand, you can unmute yourself, or you can just drop a line in the chat box. I would be very, very happy to read out the questions for you if there are any questions.
সাউন্ড আসছে
আমাদের কাছে চলছে হ্যাঁ সাউন্ড আছে সুন্দর সাউন্ড
আচ্ছা
All
একটু
right.
কন্টিনিউ করো
So
সাউন্ডটা
let me just ask, a question from this on this particular text. Um, what I always, like I do agree with a lot of things that you have said. That how Dushyanta is very different in the natural setting, vis-a-vis how he acts and reacts when he is in the capital or in the city. All of that is taken. But what I was also interested to know about, how he performs his masculinity in a different manner in both the settings. Right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
এটা তো আমাদের এই বিল্ডিংটা নিচে হচ্ছে নতুন বিল্ডিংটা
আরেকটা দুটো থেকে
আরেকটা দুটো আড়াইটা থেকে বলে
ও আড়াইটা থেকে
আড়াইটা থেকে আছে সেটা তো আমি করছি
আড়াইটা
ঠিক আছে
Your voice is breaking and we can't see you both. Right?
তাহলে এটা তো সুন্দর হচ্ছে আর কিছু করার না ওটা আরামসে চলছে
No, the voice is still muffled.
সাউন্ডটা দিতে পারো
Well, is it better now?
Yes, that'd be good.
ভুল দিয়েছি
তুই দেখ না তুই একটু দেখলে বুঝতে পারবি।
আরে আমি লিংকটা ঠিকঠাক করে দিচ্ছি
আচ্ছা ওই স্যারের কাছে কোন লিঙ্কটা ছিল
Shakuntala, uh,
দেখলে তো বুঝতে পারবি
includes the Ratnarasta, pitiable state, but the moment Matali, I guess, approaches that immediately takes up this
Well, your audio is breaking. We're not able to hear you clearly. We can hear bits and parts of what you're saying, but you're not clearly audible.
Yes, we have connectivity issues.
I think this worked. Yeah. Now it's fine.
No, see, I was trying to say is that Kalidasa has always tried to, portray Dushyant as a very masculine king. He is introduced as a hunter, and even when he realizes what he has done, say Shakuntala, and he is in a pitiable state, languishing, say, in the garden. The moment Matali approaches him that he has a job to just fight a war, immediately he takes up his weapons. So Kalidasa has portrayed him as a very masculine king, and he also seems quite rational. If you bring in Durvasa's verse, the of things, then the way he has treated Shakuntala, well,
চলছে নাকি দেখি
that.
আমার
So I'm trying to see is
সাউন্ড ঠিক আছে সাউন্ড ক্লিয়ার তুই জাস্ট দেখ লাইভ চ্যাটটা চেক কর লাইভ চ্যাটটা চেক কর না
তোমার আড়াইটা থেকে তাই তো তুমি এখানে বসতে হবে তাহলে আর তুমি এখান থেকে বসবে আড়াইটা এখানে করে দেবে কোথাও যাওয়ার দরকার নেই।
এখানে
যে যখন বলবে একটু পিন করবে
হ্যাঁ
আপনি স্যার খেলে নিয়েছেন
তোমরা খাওনি
আমার কাছে
বসতে হবে আড়াইটার মধ্যে আমি আসছি
ঠিক আছে
কথাই শুনে নেই।
Okay, the voice is breaking again. The voice is breaking again. Okay, so what we will do is we will try to have this discussion later, because I think because of the internet connectivity, the fluctuations in internet, we are not able to hear your entire argument. We heard only a part of it, but I guess that because of the paucity of time, we will have to pause here so that we can finish the session on time and we can continue with this discussion later. If you write a paper, or if you elaborate on this particular aspect somewhere else, do share with us. Great. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. If you can stay back for the rest of the session, or if you can join later, it would be wonderful. But if you can't, then we will really miss you. And thank you again. May I ask Dr. Shonali to continue the session?
Thank you. Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, yes.
All right. So the next speaker is Manasi Grover. Just one, sorry.
So let me just.
Mansi Grover from the Department of English, Faculty of Humanities and Languages, Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. The title of her paper is Globalization and the Disabled Body in Hindi Cinema. Right now, I don't have Mansi's bio note on me. I think I have to fish it out. Will Saurav, who was introducing
Yes.
will you be able to please help me out here? I'm very sorry.
Okay, ma'am, I will take
Let me do this on behalf of Shora. Mansi is a very good friend of mine, first to begin with that, and I'm really, really happy that Mansi could join us today. Mansi has worked on the topic of disability extensively, and her doctoral research is on the same idea. She's basically looking at Hindi cinema and how disability is basically shown in these films. That's one. Apart from that, Mansi is very, very active when it comes to performance and theater, etc. So she is an actor as well, and I'm really, really happy that she could share her ideas on disability, or rather on the disabled body in Hindi cinema today. Thank you, Mansi.
Thank you so much, Madhuri. Hi, Shonali. Yeah. So, am I audible? Yeah. The topic of my paper is globalization and a disabled body in Hindi cinema. I have a short PPT also.
Right. You can share it from your computer, I guess. You can simply share your screen and it will work.
Is it visible, Madhuri?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Right. So, the paper attempts to examine the impact of globalization on a disabled body through a cinematic analysis of Hindi films ranging from 1930 to 2020. The paper will trace how globalization has foregrounded disability from an exclusionary category to everyday reality by bringing the complex ideas of access, human rights, freedom of expression to the forefront. The advent of globalization has led to a change in the form and content of Hindi cinema, which will form the crux of the paper with an in-depth analysis of films like Guru, Margarita with the Straw, and Ship of Theseus.
These
three films delve into the lived experiences of disabled people, where the characters are grappling with their everyday material realities, dealing with issues of agency, access, care, pain, frailty, issues which were never seen before the 2000s. Now, I have a photograph which I thought I'll share with you all. So this is a photograph from. It's actually a screenshot that
Mansi, sorry, you're
Yeah.
still on the first page, the title page.
Wait. I'll
Okay,
do that.
right. This was Jailer, right?
Yeah, jailer.
1968.
Can you see the picture now?
Yes, we can see.
Yes. So this is a photograph from the film Jailer, made in 1938 by Sohrab Modi. So this shows a bunch of blind beggars trying to cross a street, like they're helping out each other, and they have their hands on each other's shoulder, trying to cross the road. So this was one visual that was hovering throughout the film, showing, a sort of a dependency narrative that is being created in the cinema throughout from 1930s to 1990. So this is something that would go on from 1930 to 1990, and there would be a certain change in the narrative around 90s, which will further see a shift during 2000s. So I'm trying to trace that, and this is the first visual which I thought I'll leave you with. Yeah. So the representation of persons with disabilities in Hindi cinema becomes a site of contestation, as they are represented through an ableist gaze. The role of films in the dissemination of ideas has been extremely important and has been instrumental in adding to the discrimination against persons with disabilities. It reinforces the creation and use of disabled stereotypes. It perpetuates the medical and charity model of disability that perceives disability as an individual's problem and institutionalizes and pathologizes a disabled person. Right. So, every society displays structural invisibility against people who do not fit into the hegemonic discourse of normality and therefore excludes them, separates them, and socially disempowers them. The media portrayals promote an attitude that is unidimensional and has a microscopic understanding of what disability is. It is seen across history and culture that the disabled are portrayed as helpless, dependent, weak, vulnerable, and as incapable bodies. Such repressive representations ultimately portray them as subjugated bodies, inadequate or unrestrained, and at the same time redundant and expendable. Renowned disability research scholar Anita Ghair writes that in India, disability is understood more as a metaphor than a lived reality. Even cinema uses disability in a tropic manner to symbolize some aspect of a character or a cultural meaning. Disability study scholars David Mitchell and Sharon Snyder have called this understanding of disability a narrative prosthesis. According to Paul Longmore, people with disabilities invoke anxiety and revulsion in the non disabled because they are defined as literally embodying loss of control, loss of autonomy, at its deepest level, finitude. A 1965 film Arzu sums this anxiety in one of its scenes, where the female protagonist Usha tells Sarju, the male protagonist, that अपाहिज होने से तो मर जाना अच्छा है. It is better to die than be disabled. Gokul Singh and Disnayak, Indian film scholars, notice in their analysis of Indian popular cinema that popular cinema is committed to the maintenance of the status quo despite various attempts at highlighting social injustices. If one locates a disabled character in this scenario, a status quo, a compulsory able-bodiedness, is maintained towards the end of the bodiedness forms the foundation of every other system that surrounds us. Earlier films like Jailer, Patang, Anurag, Jheel ke झील के उस पार created a formulaic base which was followed even decades later. They have given a prototype of how disability is represented in a world which is ableist and links disability with dependence. Therefore, the idea of curing a disabled person takes prevalence in the films, and when a protagonist, say for example, is a blind woman, the rectification of blindness is done in order to make her desirable in this patriarchal ableist world. The meta narrative of dependency changed during 1980s with films like Sparsh, Sunena, and Sangeet. It was in Sangeet that depicted the first blind woman character who resisted this idea of cure and was successful in doing that. It was the first time that a disabled woman was voicing what she felt and had the agency to express herself. The 90s saw the Bollywoodization of Hindi cinema, and the Hindi film industry got established, which was never seen before. This it was granted the industry status by the government of India in 1998, and there was a shift in the filmmaking techniques and aesthetics. It was in 2005 that a film like Black was made.
Okay,
Sanjay
display
Leela
করছি
Bhansali experimented with the aesthetics of his films and produced something matching the international levels. There was also a shift that was observed from 2010 onwards, where filmmakers choose to portray stories which were complex and they were made in small budget. The multiplex culture opened up a space for films with a realistic aesthetic. Films like Ship of Theseus, Margarita with the Straw saw a move away from the pity inspiration narrative, and they gave a more real life narratives of a nuanced experience of disability.
এখান
The
থেকে চালিয়ে দিচ্ছি
visibility of
তিন
disabled
বলছি
characters increased, and the plot
কি
of
চাই
the
বলো
stories moved beyond their
দেখো
disability
হ্যাঁ
being a
ল্যাপটপ আর
conflict
কোথায়
in their love
আমাদের দুটো
lives.
ল্যাপটপ তো দিয়ে
There
দিচ্ছি
was also
না আমরা
seen in
চাইছি
a
না, আমি
film like
দেখাই
Margarita with the Straw, which took into account the voice of people,
এখানে কোথায়
especially a woman
এগুলো তো তুমি
with
আমাকে
cerebral
দিয়েছো এটা
palsy,
এটা একটা
Miss
আমার
Malini
কাছে
Chib.
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
Her
আচ্ছা ফিজিক্স
lived
একটা ল্যাপটপ ছিল
experiences,
কোথায়
her constant
লাস্ট
assistance in
কালকে নিয়ে
creating
কাজের
the
সুযোগ হচ্ছে
character
না
of
নতুন
Laila
অফিসে গেছি
enriched the film in the way it sought to represent cerebral palsy. The motto, "Nothing about us without us," was rightly applied in the making of this film. The film moved away from disability as signifying something. The film depicted cerebral palsy as cerebral palsy and not as a synecdoche
আচ্ছা
of
ওটা নিয়ে
something.
কোথাও গেছে
Another film, Guru, was able to capture the lived experiences of disability. The character of Meenu
ওই
was
ল্যাপটপটাই আছে
constantly
ওইটা আমার
aware
হাতে
of the
ল্যাপটপটা
changes that her body went through
বুঝলে তো ওই
because
ল্যাপটপটা
of the
দিয়ে পাচ্ছি না
multiple sclerosis, which was diagnosed at an early age. She talks about being financially independent, also talks about her aspirations. She also
নো সাউন্ড
expresses
না
her
সাউন্ড ঠিক আছে
wishes
সাউন্ড কি
to
লো
live without pain.
মানে ইয়েটা
बिना
পিকচার
मल्टीपल
কোয়ালিটিটা বসে
स्क्लेरोसिस
যাচ্ছে
के
আর কি
बिना
ঠিক আছে
दवाई के
ওটার কিছু
बिना
করার নেই
व्हील चेयर के सिर्फ 3 दिन. She wants to transcend or disengage herself from her body,
তো ম্যাম মেসেজ
but
করছে সাউন্ড
ignoring or discounting the needs and sensations
সাউন্ড
of a
ভালো না
body is generally a luxury of the healthy and able body. Meenu is shown coping with her illness by accepting her body for what it is and reconstructing herself every day with every single day that she gets to live. She has even counted the number of days that she would live since her illness is life threatening and she knows the reality of it. There's a beautiful scene in the film where Sham, her love interest, and Meenu share a kiss at the marine drive. It is the first inter-abled kiss scene in the history of Hindi cinema. Reimagining disability in this way accomplishes crucial work. First, it shows disability as a significant human experience that occurs in every society, every family, almost every life. Second, it helps one accept the fact. Third, it helps integrate disability in our knowledge of human experience, history, and culture. The 2010 brought about a change in the depiction of blind women characters in the two films, though not belonging to the popular mass category of films. Khanum from Margarita with the Straw and Alia from Ship of Theseus is worth looking at. These characters are closer to real lived experiences of blind women and do not fall prey to melodramatic excess as seen in the past. These are films made under low budget formats and see a spilling of popular and art cinema into each other. Ship of Theseus portrays Alia, a blind photographer, who is shown maneuvering in a busy city like Mumbai using a white cane and an audio communicator that assists her in taking pictures, which she later etches into 3D photos. She would take pictures through her tactile, olfactory, and auditory senses. It is the first film in Bombay cinema to show a blind character using digital assistive devices and is reasonably accommodated where she stays. So there is a shift that we see after 2010. So she gets a cornea transplant and her life goes topsy turvy after that, which is usually not shown in the films before, before 2000. If you look at films like Anurag, Jheel Ke Us Par, they never talked about what happens to this character who has gained the eyesight back. So this is the first time the director, Anand Rai shows something like this. Anand Gandhi tries to show something where, this woman's life changes after she gains the eyesight back. So there is no description of the lives of these people post their surgery in films like Jailer or Anurag or Jheel Ke Us Par. Alia is not able to adjust to this new reality and feels overwhelmed when she gains this gift of sight. So this idea of wholeness and completeness, which was perpetuated through the films before, sees a change after 2010. Films like Guru, Ship of Theseus, Margarita with the Straw are a few films that attempted to map and create disabled characters in a nuanced manner and not just in binaries. These films contest the idea of ability and normalcy, establish disability as a relational concept based on presumptions and attitudinal environments created by hegemonic, able bodied world that emphatically deny vulnerability, contingency, and mortality. These films have led to the creation of a landscape that comprises heterogeneous bodies and promote the idea of biodiversity. They have consciously added to the cultural re-symbolization of disability representation, which is inclusive and sees disability as human variation and not as deficit. Now, here is another photo that I want to end my paper with. This is a picture from Ship of Theseus, where these blind characters are at an exhibition. Now, if you see, it is almost similar to the picture that I had shown before from the film Jailer, and how there is a change in the narrative in the 5 decades. Not 5 decades, 7 decades. So from 1938 to 2012, one can see the difference in the images of how we portray, how we represent blindness, how we represent disability. So there's a need to reimagine disability, and universities worldwide have started talking about disability studies as a discipline. If done with right intentions, it will be able to look at disability as a significant human experience, and our bodies are ever evolving. This might help to integrate disability into our knowledge of human experience and history, and to integrate disabled people into our culture. It is important to move beyond the binaries and not create other of a disabled person. The post-humanistic world that we live in urges us to view all bodies as dependent on each other and coexisting and co-evolving together. Thank you.
জিমনেসিয়ামে কিছু লাইভ হওয়ার ওটা তো সিক্রেট
Thank you so much, Mansi. It was wonderful listening to you. And as you have rightly pointed out, like I remember how in many of one of the earliest representations I saw was in Ramayana and Manthara's depiction, and how it's used as often used as a metaphor to denote some kind of it has a vilifying factor of sorts. Anyway, so we can take questions and all later. So we have to move on to the next
Sonali,
presenter.
Sonali, if we can have the question round here only, because I too have a class at 2:30. So
All
if
right.
this okay.
Okay. If anyone has any questions to ask to Mansi, you can please write it down in the chat box, and or also turn on your mic and ask the same. Anyone, please raise your hands if you want to ask a question. I also wanted to talk about one of the you remember that movie Shan, where the character of I think it's Nazar Khan
Yes, on
was
the
this
yes.
informer, and yeah. So and there's always the disabled person will either be very good or would have a certain kind of metaphorical aspect to it, and so on. So why do you think that this shift happens from the 90s onwards, the specific shift that you are talking about of representing disability on screen? How do you locate where do you locate that shift, or even in the later this thing
Yeah.
post to millennium depiction of disability on screen? So what brought those changes?
So this idea of human rights coming into the scene, I feel that there is much more. We talk about these issues now. We talk about rights. We talk about right-based approach these days, and it's so important that each one of us, tries to understand that we all need to have that kind of agency. And with the coming of these rights and all these different movements that we have seen during the 21st century, and also this the convention, the UN convention coming in for the disabled people, all these changes have led to certain kind of shift that we see in Indian cinema. We will not be able to find a very I would say not a very sharp shift that way, but there is a certain shift that we can see somewhere happening around 1980s. Then a film made in 92, and suddenly you would see when the multiplex culture came in, after 2008, 2010, there is a shift in the narrative, and the themes, the thematic threads are much more closer to our lives, and you could see these real life stories coming in. So I feel this right based approach has led to this change. And this idea of human rights, when this the UN convention was made, I feel and we have borrowed a lot from the Western models also. So the West gave us this idea of human rights, and we are able to talk about these issues now. Especially, when we're talking about films like Margarita with the Straw, talking about sexuality of a disabled person is something which was never done before. There was a slight, reference to it in the film, like Guru, and where this character of Meenu talks about how she wishes to get married, how she wishes to have her own home, how she wishes to earn, and she wishes to invest in share market. So that was something that was observed in 2007. So this is something that I feel that this right based model brought in this change. Yeah.
Yes, and also like how this is like it's not just something which also exists within a spectrum. It's not just one cannot just designate things without taking into account the nuances that they are present therein. Right. So it was wonderful listening to you, and we have to move on to the next presenter, Madhura Ganguly. Madhura is currently an assistant professor in Amity Institute of English Studies and Research, Amity University, Noida. Hi, Madhura. Her area-specific research includes migration studies and culture studies based on internal and international policies. Her recent research areas have focused on soft power diplomacy in South Asia and Southeast Asian countries, with special references to mass media culture. She has done her MA in English and MPhil and PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and she is also the recipient of the Canadian Commonwealth Research Fellowship in 2012. Madhura's paper is titled Post-Modernity in Anime, Globalization and Connotations of Indo-Japanese Cultural Symbolism. So over to you, Madhura, and I'm looking forward to your paper.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Shonalidi. Good afternoon to everyone. Am I audible? All right. Good. Just a couple. One, kindly pardon me because right now we're going through this bout of viral. I might have a coughing bout. Please pardon me for that. And the second is, what is the exact time in which I will have to end? I would then limit my talk to
minutes.
that. 15 minutes. So starting from now. All right, it's 2:20. Thank you so much. I would like to share a PowerPoint presentation right now. So I'm just sharing it. Window. If you could tell me if it is visible. Just a sec. Is it visible?
Not yet. Now it's coming, yes.
All right. So this paper deals with the postmodernity in anime and globalization. Now, when we talk about anime, I have made it very specific today because, of course, I'll be dealing with a lot of ideas. But today, when we talk about anime, it's ironically with languages coming over through time and with the use of, with globalization and cultural constructs being transferred. The word lost in translation has somehow, or rather the phrase is lost in translations, has somehow become a bit more, I would say, symbolic, because it is no more lost in translation, but rather it is often remade through translations, especially the symbolism in it. Today, all over the world, especially in the post-pandemic era, we see that rather than books, where you're flipping through pages, it is you're thumbing through narrations. And in fact, in Japan, Korea, South Korea, and parts of the Indo-Pacific, today's generation are called the thumbelinas, because rather than thumbing through books, they thumb through their entire phones. So this idea, for us, for our generation is born in the 90s, the word thumbelina would imply one of the fables, one of those fairy tales. But for a generation which is coming up, absolutely is being brought up on the construct of images. So, and Japan has a huge role to play here, especially when it comes to India. Now, if you're looking at language as a means of international communication, so it is imperative for human cognitive powers and reasoning to have language. But whether it be your Lacanian principles or your Saussure or Derrida, we do know that it is deeply symbolic. Today, if we look at, very practically speaking, the use of narratives has shifted from reasoning to first, earlier we used to have this idea of observation, experimentation, observation, and then reasoning. Today, it is reasoning. Reasoning is the last idea here. We are given a symbol, and often it is coming with its own construct, its own ideological, its own social, its own political construct. Similarly, and it is especially the political, if you look at this idea of recognition, so the sense of recognition is symbolic, it is visual, it is image, it is filled with an image. So when we look at a text today, be it race, be it culture, be it political identities, everything is brought to us in the form of an image, and they come with their own subtextual narrations. So today, when we're reading a lot of literature, when we're listening to music, there is often no boundaries. And as I said, Japan has had a very important part because in the 1970s, it came up with a very concentrated uh, political ideology within its own parliament, which was known as the Cool Japan construct. Of course, South Korea started following it in the late 1990s. And in the 1970s onwards, Japan, at that time, it spent around $2 billion to promote itself as a cultural power, which leads to it being predominant in its soft power policies. Now, if you look at the shift of language usage from Eurocentric to that of a very post-colonial construct, excuse me. So, from a very Eurocentric to a very post-colonial construct, what we see is that earlier, especially with colonization, language was deeply Eurocentric. However, in the post-colonial era, there has been a shift of that Eurocentrism. Today, the word sushi is not an anomaly. Today, you get to hear the word sushi even the word noodles. When we were young, first noodles was Maggie, that's it. But today we see that there has been a complete shift and nobody thinks twice in using the word ramen. So it has become integrated into our logocentrism rather. And this leads to a rise of new cultures. And here anime is very important because what we see is that, especially for the one when we look at metropolitan cities, and it is slowly seeping into from the metropolitan cities to the interiors of India, that today Doraemon is no more about a Japanese anime. Doraemon or even Shin-chan. Now Shin-chan is somebody you're calling out of love and affection. And it has become part of everyday construct. So from there, today, my mother watches Shin-chan, and I'm sure she doesn't understand Japanese. So you get and then you have your Hello Kitties. So when you have your Hello Kitties, it is the story. It's an anime of a cat in London, which has been drawn by a Japanese mangaka. So the fragmented idea of mass media, you will now see that today the mass media is deeply fragmented. There is no more a core media. And because of that, because there is there is a very subjective interpretation of mass media. Today you will find a Hello Kitty pouch in your locality where nobody will know what that Hello Kitty meant. So we see that with post-globalized use of language, internet, mass media, there has been a huge shift in from the Eurocentricity of language, from the Eurocentricity of images to that of a very secular form. And it is deeply ironic to note that while on the earlier generations would have these images of not just Eurocentrism, but a very post-Christian idea of what language is, which was very deeply gendered. Today, images and symbols are not at all gendered. A Hello Kitty, yes, definitely gendered, but you will see that there is a deliberate means of shifting from gendered languages as well as one can say a very religious aspect of it. So an anime like the Seven Deadly Sins has absolutely nothing to do with the Seven Deadly Sins, which is deeply biblical. You will notice that these characters are out as characters who simply are manifestations of human emotions. Now, if you look at the symbolic intent of it, as you can see, these are all advertisements. Today we've become very, very used to it. So language becomes images in the postmodern era. And of course, there is Jameson's Rise of Late Capitalism, where he talks about the intent of this kind of symbolism. And with the hyper-reality of language, it has become more real to us than what is actually real. Today, if you ask a child whether they have watched a Chota Bheem or a Doraemon, they are very aware of a Doraemon or a Shin-chan. than they are more aware of their. I'm a Bengali, so it's of course Thakumar Juli. So this entire construct, so there's a constant meta narrative being created, which is not just cross cultural, but it is also a normalization of the foreign. Today, it is no more foreign. I mean, it is deeply ironic that when we look at our education system post the new education policy, Sanskrit comes under the foreign languages along with French and everything else, because it is more foreign for a younger generation which has not been brought up with that kind of a vernacular. So the hyper-real becomes more real. And there is a linguistic shift, a narrative shift, a cultural shift. In fact, another point to be noted is that there is a Ramayana that's come out. That Ramayana has come out where the image of Ram is 6 feet. Now, if you look at the entire mythological construct of it in the 8th century BC, when you have the Ramayana, the Mahabharata coming out, I don't think there were 6 feet Rams anywhere. And this giganticity being given to something which is almost super heroic, in this entire construct of the superhero itself takes away from the cultural origins of it. Because when we grew up with these stories of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they were mythological stories which would come up with, excuse me, so they were mythological stories which were meant to be symbolic of certain morality, of certain ethics. Today it has become deeply individualist. And this is a paradox, because on the one hand, with the symbolic intent of language in the postmodern era, especially with anime, there is not a nation of the recipient. Rather, it is given to us. And so in the era of advertisements, we have simulations. Now, I mean, this is Harry Potter, but this was the easiest way to point it out rather than anime, because I mean, today the word Harry Potter is synonymous. People buy a lot of things. So it is a way of implementing the power of one nation over the other, or rather constructing a hierarchy. Today, I'm sure all of you are under this notion. I mean, you are aware of this entire phenomenon of the South Korean Hallyu stars and everything. I mean, when not to mention all these BTSs and their armies. For us, the army meant the army. Nowadays the word army itself has changed. So now when we look at cultural communications and the implications in economy, it is very important. Because if you look at it, new literatures and translations are no more lost in translations. They are reconstructed through translations and giving rise to new lexicons. Similarly, if you look at the way technology has been used to instigate this change for economy. Because to be very frank, subscribing to one of these OTT platforms and watching a Doraemon would benefit a certain segment, not the local populace. Because very frankly speaking, in India, the populace would not benefit from that. It is that moneyed, one can say, the spending middle class, which are taking in these newer transliterated works. And of course, then there is manga, anime, and yes, food. You can see examples in food. As I said, sushi has become part of it. Now, if you look at the post-pandemic interpretations, look at the way in which hyper-reality has become a very important part of it. So, in mass media, today the mass media is mostly performative. It is not narrative, it is performative. And that performance is symbolic, but symbolism is given to us. Again, I kind of repeat that. Similarly, it is a form of micro-surveillance as well. Your mass media is a way, because why am I calling it micro-surveillance? Every time we Google something, there are algorithms about us which tell people what kind of products we are supposed to buy. And of course, the society has now become a spectacle. So, as Guy Debord in his 1967 work pointed out, that society is a spectacle. And we are sharing in this spectacle in the form of anime, in the form of manga, in the form of cultural revelations which are not foreign to us anymore. So, thank you. And I just wanted to point out at the end of this that if you look at these two, and even to look at these two symbolisms. Can you see these two, Hello Kitty and... All right, perfect. So, if you look at the symbolism, they each come with their own narrative. But just to point out, there has been a significant change from this white, cuddly little kitty to this Superman. Could anybody think of what's the significant change? The first thing that strikes you?
It's more of a aggrandized masculine sort of a,
Absolutely.
Yeah, the first one is quite cute, adorable, and the second one has that machoism, like masculinity.
And the most striking thing, this Superman is not your white Anglo-Saxon Protestant part of the American South. This one is a black Superman. So not only are we breaking gendered stereotypes, we are also breaking racial stereotypes, and we're creating new narratives from it. So thank you. I think that's all for my presentation. And any queries if you have, I'll be glad to answer.
So we will be taking the questions for this paper at the end of the session together with others. Will that be fine, Madhura?
Excuse me. All right, that would be fine, I guess, because I'll be logged in and then.
Okay, so we will quickly go to the next presenter, Dr. Indira Chakravarti Bhattacharya, who is an assistant professor in English at the Department of English, St. Xavier's University, Kolkata. She has completed her PhD from Vishwa Bharati Shantiniketan, and her areas of interest include Canadian diasporic literature, migration studies, digital humanities, and new literatures. The title of her paper is Our Lives Have Become Weapons in a Rugged Political Contest, a reading of Behrouz Boochani's No Friend But the Mountains. So over to you, Indira. We look forward to hearing your paper.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
And visible? I don't know whether I'm visible or not. Okay, so I think there are some connectivity issues here. I'll try to address this, troubleshoot this problem, but I don't know whether I can do anything about it. Okay, so I can just switch off, maybe I can switch off the video and just read the paper. Sorry about this inconvenience, but kind of bear with me. So yeah, I'm going to read a paper on a particular text which has been written in a very threatening situation, kind of a situation which is under confinement, and not just confinement, when somebody is in some other continent and outside one's own nation. So this is about Behrouz Boochani's No Friend But the Mountains. It's a text which has been written in 2018 during incarceration. He was incarcerated in Manus Islands, which is in the Papua New Guinea, and he is actually a Kurdish journalist, and since he was politically persecuted from Iran, he had to flee there, and he actually depicts about his experience in the prison. And what I'm trying to sort of locate in the paper is how he is trying to question, he's trying to challenge the narrative technique through his writing style, and it's a kind of a resistance. What I'm reading is that his narrating or his narrative technique is actually as a form of a resistance, because it denies any kind of classification. Now, through this process of resistance, probably he is also being a non-conformist, not just being a person who is creating a chaos in the prison, as it has been sort of suggested in certain sections of the book. But he is very calmly resisting through his writing, which is which is quite striking for me. And also, I would like to sort of apologize before I start reading my paper. This is a kind of a working paper, so I would, I really apologize for this being a little scattered sometimes, some of my ideas. I'm really apologetic about that. I'll try and sort of finish off, my ideas within the stipulated time because it is scattered. So I am kind of, apologetic that it might take a longer time as given to me more than that. Okay, so history has witnessed masterpieces composed under solitary confinement, beginning from Beatrice's The Consolation of Philosophy, written in the year 1524 AD, Dante Alighieri's The Divine Comedy, Cervantes' Don Quixote, to Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Diary Under Detention, and also Jean Amery's At the Mind's Limits, Contemplations by a Survivor on Auschwitz and Its Realities, written in the year 1980. Globalization, as we understand it, is a phenomena which precisely was defined as a kind of a world order that increased and facilitated the interdependence of various economies, particularly speaking about the context after Second World War. It was primarily meant to increase the ease of flow of people, goods, and communication. It did happen so in all the ways, considering that the first wave of migration and permeation began with European expansionism, and later in the 19th century with the settlement of people across the globe. In the next wave, particularly with the emergence of the United States of America as a global superpower post World War II, and the subsequent propelling towards the financial resettlement in the 1990s among interdependent countries after Cold War. In the transnational and globalized world order, permeation is a phenomena in every aspect, whether it is the interchange because cultures within the nation or exchange of cultures or technologies or permission of humans across borders. Therefore, it becomes extremely important in the current context to rethink about the challenges posed by this permeation process and how that has cut across our lives in different ways, particularly in keeping the promises it had delivered. This is especially relevant in the context of the integration of human beings across international borders. Permeation within various disciplines is surpassed by the permeation that happens within genres of the same discipline. Having said that, it is, however, not easy for authors or artists to challenge or debunk various genres and sync them with fluidity. During this permeation process itself, challenges are posed to regular norms of compartmentalizing various kinds of writing in specific qualities or traits. These interfaces, where interaction of various genres take place, are the sites of resistance. In this context, the text No Friend by the Mountains by Bucani plays a pivotal role, especially when appeals of negotiation between justice and culture are coming to the fore from various social interests. This negotiation probably would mean devising new methods that would encourage harmony within various domains. The article will actually try to locate these primary sites of physical and psychological violence and the use of biopolitics. In the book by Jean Amery mentioned earlier, he devotes a chapter to intellectuals in the Nazi camp. Being an essayist and a novelist himself, he focuses on how writers made sense of their incarceration. It is a matter of wonder whether an author's intellectual background and an intellectual basic disposition help a camp prisoner in the decisive moments or not. It also poses questions such as whether the knowledge, the initiation to the processes of systemic torture, makes their survival easier. Though Amery's answer to the question he asked is negative, but in this pursuit, Bucani attempts in the narration of the text between prose, poetry, and reportage may be considered a process of negotiation by means of resistance towards classification of any sort. This has actually taken the idea of reportage to a very different level. Behrouz Bukani, who's a Kurdish human rights defender, poet, producer, and activist, was working in Iran since the turn of the century, who had to flee his country in 2013 under the threat of Islamic terrorists, threatened not only by the uncertainty of retaining his life, but also his resistance against the obliteration of his Kurdish traditions. It is no longer unknown to the world that what extent of violence has been set in motion in Iran, how the Kurds are victimized in the name of religion and ethnic cleansing in the current times. In this book, Bukhari tries to write in a style of overlapping genres, ranging from prison literature to Australian dissident writing, including elements of Kurdish literature and transnational writing. And what is most interesting is that the text was originally tapped out in a mobile phone in fragments as text in WhatsApp in Persian, which was later translated by his friend Omid Tofigian. It is a form of a writing that emerges from sites of calculated state violence and antagonism against people fishing for safety and freedom. True to its spirit, Bukhari has named this unusual narrative of his lived experience in the Manus prison and has rightfully named the book after the famous Kurdish maxim. The current essay also intends to uncover and address these sites of problems and try to gauge what policies, as promised by the Scotland government, have really been successfully endorsed or followed. The style of writing adopted by Bukhari is exemplary. He does not limit himself to a biographic style, neither is his writing merely a belter of successive events. It is coupled with series of poems which instantaneously occurred to him in a specific context. Despite the content, the events moving from remote and recent past to present context is melodious, rhythmic, and poetic. Imagined and written in Farsi under a looming threat, a constant fear of being caught with the hidden phone, Bukhari's writings does get affected, not in the congruity, but in its sense of continuity. While reading the text, though it appears to readers like an account of events witnessed and simultaneously documented, it is also a memoir. Like a memoir, it is a compilation of a series of anecdotes or short snapshots about the lives of the inmates and himself. Bukhari's book, No Friend by the Mountains, is a book about, among other things, with its power of writing, which invites the comparison. It seems to be a text self-consciously positioned within a broader literature of incarceration. The narrative begins with Bajani's leaving Indonesia on a decrepit boat, a voyage that culminates in his arrival on Australian territory, specifically Christmas Island. There, as asylum seekers learn to their imminent transfer to Manus Island, they are told to change into new clothing provided by the guards. I'll quote from a text. There's a section where there's an episode where these asylum seekers who had come from Indonesia to the Australian borders were immediately asked to take a flight from the border from the airport to a place called Christmas Island, where they would be boarded into the plane. They were almost like stuffed into the plane like cattle and mistreated. And at the very onset, they were asked to shed their clothes, and they would have to be wearing clothes which were loose and ill-fitted, which is very poignantly described by Bukhari. He says that these clothes are not just shedding of clothes. It's not just the act of shedding the clothes, but also the shedding of the identity that these asylum seekers were meant to sort of stick to or at least reclaim. So I quote from the text: a grim-looking officer gives a set of clothes to anyone who passes through the strip and search stage, even though the clothes don't match the size of the person in any way whatsoever. There is no choice. We have to wear whatever they issue. Yellow polyester t-shirts, they transform our bodies. They utterly degrade us. The vignette of the narrative is immediately recognizable as a key generic element of the prison narrative. There are instances of several forms of dehumanization and stripping of identity. The episode of the uniform, when the potential refugees are expected to cooperate and wear ugly, loose-fitted uniform, they not just strip their clothes but also their identity, because that gives them an identity which is merely a number in a series. Bukhari, for instance, himself was MS-045. So there's a number that has been assigned to each asylum seeker, and they do not know each other's name. So if anybody takes a look at the book, you will find that Bukhari has very interestingly named any interesting character he found. After their special characteristic that he discovered. For instance, there is this there's this man called the president, or there are people whom he has named after their typicalities that they display in the prison. So the uniform externalizes the transformation of the detainee. In civilian clothes, he is a citizen. In the ill-fitting costume of the jail, he becomes a prisoner. This is a crucial aspect of Bukhari's project, to understand Manus Island first and foremost as a place of punishment, where waiting is a mechanism of torture used in the dungeon of time. This is a phrase that he puts it in his the book. Throughout No Friend by the Mountains, he pointedly refers to the facility in which he remains contained, not by its official description as a regional processing center, but rather as Manus Prison, a characterization that universalizes his account. Buchanan's book chronicles how the road unfurls for detained refugees, specifically how they are gradually and systematically destroyed. He's saying that I am a piece of meat thrown into an unknown land. And he also writes a prison of filth and heat. Okay, so this is a prison which is it's completely squalid with very, very poor facilities for sanitation and health. The overcrowding in a crudely built camp leads to what he calls a confrontation of bodies, a confrontation of human flesh. That flesh then begins to rot in the tropical heat of Papua New Guinea. Again and again, Bukhari shows how the camp transforms living people into decaying flesh. The decomposition reaches its logical and grotesque apotheosis with self-butchery as inmates carve away at their own bodies. The inability of prisoners to attend to basic needs with dignity ensures that they need no longer feel part of the civilized order, a point Bukhari illustrates by the fate of a detainee known as the Prime Minister. The man, once an engineer and businessman, earns his nickname by his gravitas and character. His kindness is unconditional, even though he is named as Prime Minister. He is a man of virtues. He's named cynically. He is called as a Prime Minister because he kind of plans his routines so as to obtain privacy in even in the squalid toilets of the camp. So this is how he names his characters. So what I'm trying to wind up because I have been asked to sort of wind up in 5 minutes. So I have, I think, a few minutes left, 2 or 3 minutes. So what I'm trying to say is that within the camp, within the prison, these asylum seekers were very much ill-treated and they were abused, despite the fact that Australia had been a signatory in all of these conventions, especially the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or even these laws of the UN Refugee Convention of 1951 was grossly violated. So basically, what I find in the this particular text is that from the very first adoption of reference to the mandatory detention policy that was first implemented in 1994, people who were imprisoned in Australia, they have fought back. But the stories of these camps are actually a tale of suffering. They are not just a tale of demonstrations or hunger strikes or breakouts, but they're other forms or other manifestations of defiance. And Bukhari's defiance is also one of the other manifestations of defiance. And there had been a widespread struggle within and outside Australia to change these defensive policies. And a wide range of groups have been deployed to, sort of implement a huge array of strategies in opposition to the mandatory detention that has
yes,
in effect since the Howard government beginning from 1996 to 2007. So the refugee policies that were implemented were absolutely inhumane, and the Labour government have responded to refugee flows from Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and elsewhere with such inhuman sort of response. It has been a very it's a very closed kind of a protection. They kind of try to rhetoricize this whole idea about border protection through these things called these kind of attempts called Pacific solution, where people like Bukhani or the likes of him have been so-called deployed into these islands, the Manus Islands. And Manus Islands is absolutely kind of an uninhabitable space. It's absolutely humid, and especially the conditions that are that prevalent in these prisons are absolutely inhumane. So there are several attempts to sort of to describe the plight of the inmates, and kind of compares this to a nightmare. So there are several sections of the text which are written in Farsi, poems which are written in Farsi. Later, kind of translated into English by the Fijian. So yeah, and also what I'm trying to look at it as basically what I'm trying to ask is how biopower is used, or biopower has been used in this particular. The way how there has been political dissidence, the way they fought back, and the way how Bukhari describes the poignantly, how can we express these political violations in these instrumental terms, and how are the means and the ends are related? That kind of instrumental characterizes the instrumental collapse of instrumentality, the use of the useless, how these asylum seekers become apparently they are useless, but they are used. So how the instrumentality of biopolitics purports to lack an end. So I'm trying to sort of look at this through, I'm trying to read the text through these.
Thank you, Indira, and I'm sorry that we had to cut you short and then this many interruptions. It's wonderful listening to your paper, and we now have to move on to the next one. The presenter is Mohammad Rakibul Alam, who is currently working as a lecturer in English at Bangladesh Army University of Engineering and Technology at Kadirabad, Natur. He has completed his BA and MA degrees from the Department of English, Rajshahi University, and his research interest includes post-colonial studies and translation studies. So his the title of his paper is Rethinking the Human Condition, Insights from Hannah Arendt. So over to you, Rakib. Rakib, your mic is off.
Present my paper here, and before starting I would really like to all the members of the organizing committee of this wonderful conference, and my heartfelt gratitude especially to Professor Manoranjan sir. So with this sense of gratitude I would rather start my paper. So I would like to share my PowerPoint here, and just a second. So I hope my PowerPoint is visible now.
Yes.
So the title of my paper is Rethinking the Human Condition, Insights from Hannah Arendt. The book by Hannah Arendt titled The Human Condition was first published in 1958, and my paper situates the insights from this book in this postmodern and era of globalization and the issues and the features of this particular age. The key ideas that I discuss in my paper. I would rather go to that part. The Human Condition, published in 1958 by Hannah Arendt, was an ardent philosophical rethinking of what it means to be human. Arendt's interpretative abilities shine through in her arguments, and the sort of lives we should live, lead, and the amount of political involvement we should aspire for in a magnificent demonstration of what high level interpretation can do for critical thinking. Good interpretative thinkers are defined by their capacity to explain concepts, challenge established definitions, and provide sound, unambiguous definitions that enable their other critical thinking abilities
সারাদিন
to
বসে
push
বসেই
arguments
কাটছে যে
deeper and further than
পুরো জ্বালা
others.
লাগছে
Arendt's objective, this paper shows, is to make a case for political involvement and active participation in society as the ultimate
আচ্ছা এই
aims of
মালগুলোকে জোগাড়
human
করলো কোথা থেকে আমাকে
existence.
বলতো
To do
মালগুলোকে
this,
জোগাড়
she
করলো কোথা থেকে
establishes a hierarchy of methods to live an activa vita or active life. Hence, this paper offers a critical reading of Arendt's book, The Human Condition, and especially it deals with the distinction of labor, work, and action, and carefully proposes action as the ultimate human purpose of human existence. I would start by one of the quotations
না না ম্যাডাম
from
ভুল লিঙ্কে
Arendt
ক্লিক করে দিয়েছি
in his book The Life of the Mind.
ওইটা আর
This
এটা
is very striking and quintessence of Arendt's overall thinking. Arendt writes, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil." So, now I'm going to the detailed part of my paper. The Human Condition, written by Hannah Arendt and published in 1958, was a fervent philosophical
কালকে সাড়ে
re-examination
দশটায়
of
তাই তো
what it
একটা
means to
সেশন
be
আছে
human.
তোমাদের কে
We
থাকবে সাড়ে
live
দশটায়
in a time when
আমরাই থাকবো
people
সাড়ে
are
দশটায় গিয়ে
exploited
থাকবে
in
সৌম্য
large
সম্পর্কে
numbers.
এখানে
In
লিখে
terms
স্যার
of
থাকবে
both production and consumption, labor dominates our lives. As a result, every one of us, are
সবাই থাকবো
reduced
অসুবিধা
to
নেই
very little components
যা
in a
হবে এইভাবে কোনো মতে
gigantic
চালিয়ে দিবি
economic system.
কালকে তো সাড়ে দশটায় মানে
The
ওখানে
problem is that
অডিটোরিয়াম
our life is often personally meaningless to us. What we are doing has no direct significance for us or is of no
মানে
particular relevance
আজকে
to
তার
us.
ক্যামেরাটা এনেছিল ওরা
We
কি
are
ওদের মানে
transformed
ল্যাপটপ থেকে
into
স্ট্রিমটা করতো
interchangeable essences and components of a system. If one worker or laborer fails and loses their
আবে
job,
ওগুলো তো মানে
another is
টাউনেরই
quickly
না ওরা
hired
তো
to
মানে
replace
টাউনেরই
them.
হ্যাঁ এখানেরই
তাহলে
Since
অত
we are no
ওদের
longer
এক্সপার্ট হতে পারে
living in a world that is relevant to us, this dehumanized
ওরা শুধু বিয়ে
process
বাড়ি রেকর্ডিং এ
results
যায়
in alienation. The concern is that if we live in a state of alienation, the world we are creating will no longer have a solid and meaningful structure. Everything is in flux there, everything
স্ক্রিনটা
is
পজ
made
করে
and
দিলে চলো
disposed of.
আরেকটু
There is a
বাকি
greater emphasis on disposability than on durability, and the
তিনটা
production
পনেরো
matrix is
পর্যন্ত
such that it consumes the
একটা একটা গাড়ি
natural
চলছে না
environment surrounding it
সাইকেলে
at
ঘুরে
an
এসেছে ছোট গাড়ি
ever
চলছে
accelerating
কিচ্ছু চলছে
pace.
না
পাঁচটা থেকে পাঁচটা
A person
পাঁচটার বেশি
who
হয় না
merely goes to work to
পাঁচটা
do
না
the
ছটা
same thing over and over again is engaging in a fruitless and meaningless kind of labor. Work loses its meaning when it gets more
এই
repetitive and
ম্যাডাম বলছে
process
নিউ বিল্ডিং এ
driven,
পিকচার ক্লিক
with
করতে
the
হবে
person
ক্যামেরার নাম কি
increasingly becoming a component of a system whose meaning, if there is any, rests
না
somewhere
আজকে কি
outside
সব ফর্মালিটি
oneself.
পূরণ করে নিতে হচ্ছে না এগুলো আবার আপলোড করতে হবে তো
When it comes
ওয়েবসাইটে কি
to
আপলোড করতে হবে
outlining the types of lives we should lead and the extent to which we should participate in
3 দিন
politics,
রাখতে বলতে পিকচারগুলো
Arendt
3 দিন যাতে থাকে
demonstrates her
সবার ফোনে
mastery of interpretation repeatedly. At the heart of Arendt's argument is the idea that political engagement is the ultimate goal of human existence. Hence, she sets up a hierarchy of ways to live an activa vita or active life to achieve this goal. Her painstaking articulation of each word's meaning makes it impossible to deny her argument for the ultimate human goal being a life of action. Labor, work, and action are the three categories that Arendt
ক্লিক নাও
methodologically specifies as a separate level of active engagement with our
লিঙ্ক বাই
environment.
এইচ
According to Arendt, human beings interact with the world in two ways. First, by thinking about it, and then doing something about it. Most philosophers and intellectuals across history have focused on how people have thought about the world, and in her book, she wanted to answer that by concentrating much more on how humans act in the world, or what she termed human action or the activa, vita activa. Labor means the biologically necessary repetitive process of perpetuating human life as a biological species. The physiologically required repeated process of human existence as a biological species is referred to as labor. Labor, according to her, encompasses tasks such as food preparation, harvesting, cleaning, washing, cultivating crops, giving birth, raising children, and so on. As a result, these actions are not particularly human, since they constitute a fundamental and recurrent need for life to exist at all. All animals essentially go through the same processes. She referred to the second sort of human interaction with their surroundings as work. Now, work, according to Arendt, is when people propose a goal and then go about achieving it by some deliberate activity. By this, she primarily means producing durable goods, the things that inhabit our world, things like pots and pens, tables, chairs, books, and computers, etc. Hence, our everyday lives are built on a solid foundation of work, which guides the creation of long lasting goods. The daily framework within which we function as human beings is the result of various jobs, which she refers to as the worldliness of our existence. The last kind of human endeavor she analyzes is highly personal to her, and she refers to it as action. Now, she defines action as any freely initiated activity, it might be individual or collective, carried out in the public realm. This action's result is unknown ahead of time. It is entirely unpredictable. That means action, its results are entirely unpredictable. As it continues to give us new words, action is constantly generative, inventive, and creative. Action is always seminal. It creates one of a kind items. Action is always free in the sense that sorry, in the sense that it is not compelled by any irrefutable biological or other human compulsions. Action for Arendt is the most genuinely human kind of activity, and two aspects of it are crucial in her worldview. The first is that action reveals the truth of what it is to be a human being in the first place. When we take a unique action, we are constantly exposing something about ourselves by our choice, how we explain it to others, and how we argue with others to persuade others of our point of view. Every time we act, we reveal more about ourselves as human beings. But when a group of individuals act, they reveal more about the society they have built or they inhabit, which is even more significant. As a result, every action, according to Arendt, is revealing. So, from Arendt's viewpoint, action is a regulator of what it is to be human. The more human activity there is, the more action there is, the more we expose the fundamental nature of the human condition as we live, experience, and go on constructing it. The second thing about action is that its consequences are unpredictable and have no end point. We have no notion how an activity will turn out when we undertake it. One action by an individual always sets in motion a slew of other people's action. So, the personal purpose of the initial actor has no idea how influential the eventual result will be. Action is by default daunting. The outcome of it is never known beforehand and it's never final. the arrow is never at the same place.
That's good.
Therefore, Arendt suggests that humans develop two methods to cope with these mysterious yet thrilling circumstances. The first is the concept of forgiveness. Because I do not know what my actions will cause, what will be the result or the outcome, I cannot predict the
Double
bad
triple.
stuff that may happen along the
Full
path.
screen है ये.
As a result, none of us can be held accountable for
सोनाली
the
दत्तर 5
negative
minutes more.
consequences of our acts
तीनटा 10
since
হয়ে
they
যায় আমার
are
স্ট্রিম দেখতে.
unforeseeable in advance, and people can only bear with the truth via the practice of forgiveness. The second thing
तो स्ट्रीम
humans
देखता है ना.
do to cope with the unpredictable
रुपए देशी.
nature of action is the concept of promises.
अच्छे तो
We seek to gain some
रुपए
closure
अच्छे
to
अच्छे
the
करते हैं.
future by making promises
It's
about
not
it.
working man.
Arendt
Document আছে তো
argues
status
that
আছে.
these promises are crucial for humans because they increase our
तो status
potential for collective actions. Without promises, everything will be dependent on triggering chain reactions of actions, but we will not be able to
देख देख
coordinate the
देख देख
future
আমার तो
in
दिखा है.
any substantial way. Hannah Arendt is correct in emphasizing how the present economic system takes away the purpose of workers' life by preventing them from engaging in more considerable actions. However, my paper proposes that people have a restless bias to put it back
ভাই বিয়ে
in.
করে নিচ্ছে জানো আমরা.
Thus,
ভাই
this
বিয়ে করে
paper
নিচ্ছে
does
বিয়ে
not
করতে ইচ্ছে.
believe that the future is as bleak as it seems today. I hope for a
দেখছো এগুলো
day
এগুলো দেখলে
when
খারাপ
we
লাগে.
are all equally aware of our inclinations toward mass conformism and a type of regularized existence. Then we'll be more willing to confront such systems
কে?
with forgiveness and
হাত
promises
তুলেছে.
as our final alternatives.
আমার পলাশের মতো. পলাশ
Arendt
প্রতিটা স্ট্রিমে দেখেছি.
emphasizes on the role of education to
আজকে
bring
ইচ্ছা
forth
মতো চলে যাও.
substantial change.
প্রচুর কোশ্চেন জিজ্ঞাসা করো.
She writes, the aim of totalitarian education has never been to instill convictions. The aim has never been to instill convictions, but
Yes,
to
yes.
destroy the capacity to form
আমি
any.
কম্পিউটার ল্যাবে.
Here lies the great significance
কম্পিউটার ল্যাবে.
of education, that it
স্ট্রিম
will
চালাচ্ছি.
train people, it will encourage people, it will enable people to form genuine
রামরমনও আছে,
convictions
রামরমন অন্য
regarding
স্ট্রিমে.
themselves and the world they live in. And
আবার কেন?
Arendt believes that thoughts or thinking or she believes in the importance of
তাহলে শুনবি
critical
তো.
thinking. She writes, quote,
এই
there
কিছু
are no
শোনার জন্যই
dangerous
তো
thoughts.
আমিও কি করছি আমিও তো
Thinking
শুনছি.
itself is dangerous.
সবাই
And
তো শুনছে.
Arendt
তুইও
goes on
শুনছো
saying
আমিও শুনছি.
that
আমিও
under
শুনবো তুইও
conditions of
শুনবি.
tyranny, it is far easier to
আমি
act
শুনেছি
than to
আজকে
think.
বলেছে সবকিছু
Generally, we
গ্লোবালাইজেশন
make a
সম্পর্কে.
broad distinction between thinking and acting, but Arendt
বলেছে
believes
যে
that in a limiting space, in a totalitarian system of
শুনতে
education,
পারিনি.
it is rather easier to do
ও
something
তাহলে
anywhere
নেটওয়ার্ক
rather
প্রবলেম
than
ছিল.
to engage ourselves into critical thinking meaningfully. So, finally, Arendt's suggestion is that love can be the
শ্রী হাত তুলছে.
love can be the solution, and love can be the last resort for all of us. She writes, quote, love by its very
না না আমি
nature
আগে
is
থাকবো এখানে কলেজের
unworldly,
গেটে শুয়ে থাকবো
and it
মোড়ার
is
মতো.
for this reason, rather than its rarity, that it is not only apolitical but
একটা ছেলেকে ডেকে
anti-political.
এনে না যাকে তোকে
Perhaps
দেখলে
the
ফিদা হয়ে
most
যাবে.
powerful of all
শুধু মুখটা
anti-political human
শুধু শুধু
forces.
মুখটার থেকে একবার মাস্কটা
So,
সরিয়ে
with
দিবি তো
this
ব্যাস.
hope
দিয়ে একটা হাসি
and
দিয়ে দিবি
aspiration,
32 পার্টি
I
নিয়ে.
would like to end my
ছেনা থেকে
presentation
গলে
here.
জল.
Again, thank you
মাটিটা
very
দিয়ে
much,
এসছে.
everyone involved,
আকাশের পরি.
and all good wishes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rakeem. You have kept wonderful time. So that gives us time to move on to the right away, move on to the next presenter, who is Rubina Sultana. She is currently pursuing PhD
আরে
in
পিন
philosophy
করছি
at
বসে
Aligarh
আছি.
Muslim
কি কাজ আছে
University.
বল.
She has completed her master's in
চোরাই
philosophy and
কাজ
B.Ed
নাকি?
from Rabindra Bharati University, Kolkata, and her
হ্যাঁ
MPhil
চোরাই.
is in women's studies from
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ.
Chandrakona University. She is also the recipient recipient of the Maulana Azad National Fellowship in 2020. And the topic, the title of her paper is Globalization of Culture, Philosophical Perspectives. So over to you, Rubina. We look forward to hearing your paper. Rubina? Has Rubina joined?
And she has joined in, but I think for the time being she has left or
She has been disconnected.
Sound of all. Sound. Come on, very come.
All right. So,
ma'am, sorry, Rubina madam is, I think, present.
सौरभ से की बोलছে देखना
She is present.
जिम तो ऑफ होगा
Rubina madam.
आज के हमारा
so while the last presenter, is she around now?
Is using microphone.
কালকেও কি একই ধরনের টাইম টেবিল আছে নাকি আছে একটা লিস্ট আছে ও লিস্টে তো
So
টাইম
in the
ভুল
meantime,
সেটিং করা আছে
those of you who may have questions for the presenters may type them in the chat box or raise your hand, because this is the last paper. Probably we will have a few minutes to take in some questions. All right?
কিছু হয়নি এটা হাজারবার পড়ে যায় এটা কিছু কম ফেলেছি মানুষ শুধু নিয়ে নিয়ম মানুষ করে ছাড়া Okay.
Madam, I have not a question, but something observations to Rakibul Alam. So may I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rakibul Alam, for your engaging thought. But I think I have missed this part. You have said that every action is revealing and it's to expose the fundamental nature. So would you please define these sort of things or elaborate? Every action is revealing is to expose the fundamental nature.
Yeah, thank you, Sharav sir, for your question. So, Hannah Arendt, simply put, distinguishes human activities or works into three categories, and we have said that action is the last and the higher one. She particularly believes that when we act, according to her, action is something that we can never predict about its outcome. For example,
Rakib, just one sec. Saurav, can you please mute your mic?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So, action is something that we can never predict beforehand. It is so creative and it has that creative potential in it. For example, if we take the profession of teaching, if we genuinely do it or aspire to do it, then we never know that what we are discussing in the classroom or what we are doing even here, what kind of impact will be there out of these actions, or to what extent, when will it end. It is like a cycle, it goes on and on. So Arendt basically shows that work is something which have a particular end point, right? That I go to office at 9 and I come back at 5. So then it actually comes up with monthly calculations. There is some starting point and the ending point, but action is something different, which is endless, potentially, essentially endless, and its consequences are limitless in that sense. So when I pointed out that action is always revealing, I would rather suggest that action basically shows the basic human inspiration for progress, for liberty, for freedom, and for making the world a bit more livable. So when we do things, for example, Rabindranath once asserts that the genuine sign of education is that when someone plants a tree, being sure that he will not be able to take shelter under its shade. So that is a great example of action, as Aaron mentions. So in that sense, when we act without knowing the actual conclusions, when we act without even expecting the selfish end, then basically we are exposing our intrinsic human possibilities, and therefore it is revealing. It is always, I mean, possible, and potentially it carries within it great hope.
From किसे
So,
दिले?
sir, I think I have answered
Today
your question.
information. Google
Yes,
Meet
yes. And one thing, sir, you have talked about Activa Vita, and I am
Yes.
very much happy to see that. Yes, I think it is very enlightening to see that Activa live, and this is the first time that I've heard. So thank you for this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your
Okay,
question. Thank you.
okay, okay. So I have already sent in the feedback form. So if you please.
So has Rubina, is she in a position to present now, and has her technical problem been resolved? Or I can, I want to, as Rakib, you have so beautifully stated towards the end of your paper how Aaron talks about the idea of love as something that provides, it's a form of resistance of sorts in a way, right? So how, when there is a certain kind of constant attempt at, ostracizing, the kind of atrocities that are committed on based on identities, race, gender, and so on and so forth. So how the very idea of compassion and the very notion of love can itself be revolutionary. It has revolutionary potentials when you have various like even categories like love and companionship are constantly being redefined by state powers and whatnot, right? And how that also, like when talks about the whole notion of human intervention or what constitutes human. So the extending compassion beyond what is ours is what necessarily gives us that subjecthood in a certain way. And all of the papers that I have listened to so far were as in extremely interesting, and of course, like I can go on and on about so many topics that I have been listening to that you have discussed, and many questions that have been coming to my mind. For example, like in Madhura's paper, when we're talking about the way in which there is a certain attempt at normalizing the foreign, right? So the way in which now, like we have these Korean departmental stores which keep products like ramen, etc. So we have one right at Newtown which keeps all kinds of canned meat and so on and so forth. So the fact that as much as there is a certain kind of cultural exposure to things that are no longer just pertaining to Europe or the West for that matter, but in a way it also now we are constantly listening to music like BTS is very popular. We have students writing papers on BTS and the representation of the category of the flower boys in a way, and it has also dismantled the notion of aggrandized masculinity in a certain way that Bishonen and Konminan, like the Japanese and Korean terminologies for these very pretty men who dress up, put on makeup, and so on and so forth. And the kind of culture, like both of the fan culture as well as an anti-fan culture, that is also very prominent in these practices. What is your what is your observation in the way in which as much as they are letting the viewers or the audience have access to content which are not necessarily as Eurocentric or probably in the context of India, not just Bollywood but every other regional content is also available. But in a way, it also caters to a certain kind of, for for example, even in
Very good,
superhero narratives that are based in the Indian context, but there is a certain kind of marvelization of this. Like recently, I have watched Brahmastra and
এই
the
এরা কি
way in
গল্প
which
করবে তিনটা
superhero
দশে শেষ
universe
হবার
has
পরে
been
তিনটা
conceived.
পঁচিশ
So in a
আছে
way,
ও করে
it has regional like local elements, but
হ্যাঁ
also the local elements
ব্রহ্মাস্ত্র নিয়ে
are
কথা বলছি
transacted in a manner which is which is very mainstream and so on.
So, if I might point out here, my paper actually was trying to find this middle path between
শেষ হয়নি
praxis
এখন ওখানে
and the
ব্রহ্মাস্ত্র নিয়ে
narratives.
কথা চলছে
And
কি
as you
জানি
just used
আমি
the word
বলতে পারছি
flower boys, there was once a time when we read Victorian literature where women were often called, especially women who had reached that so-called
আচ্ছা
age of
ম্যামকে এবার ফোন
spinsterhood,
করো
were often called the
ফিউচারে ফোন
wallflowers.
করো
Right, they would be
কি
seated on
কোথায়
one
যাবে
side, being chaperoned by their. When you read, especially your Victorian literature, and you see your Pride and Prejudices and everything, you're reading them.
আমার সঙ্গে দিয়ে যাবে
So from there, you see this is the word, the idea of flower itself has
এবার নিয়ে যাবে
removed its
ফোনে কথা
gendered
হ্যালো
connotations. Today, it's
বলছি আর
flower
কতক্ষণ
boys.
চলবে এই
It is
মিটিংটা
no
এখনো
more those wallflowers being chaperoned around. So the way our
আর
language
এটা
has also
ইউটিউবটা
changed, and in the next couple of generations, even that will change.
হ্যাঁ
So when you're looking at this very asexuality
রাম তো
on
একটাই
in
মাছ বলে
anime,
বসেছে ওর তো
there
চলছে
is asexuality in anime, and at times either there's a lot. I mean, there's a very in your face sexuality, or
ঠিক
there's
আছে ঠিক আছে
complete
থ্যাংক
asexuality. So
চলে যা চলে যা
a
চলে যা
lot of marginalization is being
চল চল
shown
এটা ওইটা
as
শেষ করে দিয়ে যাচ্ছি
a normative
অভিককে
force
অভিককে ডাক
here, and which is in a way it's very good because these voices were marginal, yet to be part of an to be
তুই এখন
part of
কোথায়
it, to
তুই এখন
become
কোথায়
the mainstream, it needs to be an economic force. At least that
আচ্ছা
is
তুই
my
ম্যামকে
reading
একবার
of the
ফোন করে
various
জানি এই
narratives that
মিটিংটা
we're
এখনো
going
কতক্ষণ
through
চলবে এটা
now.
তিনটা দশে শেষ
Because
হওয়ার কথা
if you're looking at your previous generations, you will see for them
কোথায় আছে
this idea of
জিমনেসিয়ামে
a gendered
জিমনেসিয়াম এখন
sentence
হচ্ছে
is
নাকি
very important. But today, gendered sentences are not important anymore. So languages change, and I think it is a very nice progression from this entire feministic discourse to a more vibrant discourse on marginalization itself, based on
তোর মাস্টার
gendered
কি একটা ফোন
narratives
করতো
itself. So it's a very practical approach of going through literature, at least
ফোন
for
কর
me.
না তুই
All right. Okay. So we will catch up later, like whenever we meet and all. So I have to request Rubina to please go ahead with your paper. Are you ready now?
Yes,
অফলাইন
I'm ready
করছিল
now.
অনলাইন
Sorry for
All
the
right.
inconvenience.
No problem. Please go
অনলাইনই তো
ahead.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I'm Rubina Sultana from Aligarh Muslim
হ্যালো স্যার
University.
আমি টুইন বলছি
I'm here to present
বলছি
my
এই মিটিংটা
paper
এখন কতক্ষণ
on
মানে চালাতে হবে
globalization of culture,
তিনটা
philosophical
দশে শেষ
perspective.
এখন বাজছে তিনটা
Zehing
আঠাশ
Lely, in the context
চারটার
of cultural
তিনটা দশে
globalization,
শেষ
said
হবার কথা
that
ছিল তো তাই বলছি
the mutual
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে
identification, mutual
হ্যাঁ দেন আমি পূরণ
penetration
করে
and
দিচ্ছি
mutual absorption of different modes of production,
আচ্ছা ঠিক
consumption,
আছে
and concepts,
ওকে
thus presenting a certain homogeneous trend of cultural development. It is the common culture of human beings
চারটা পর্যন্ত
formed
চলতে
through
পারে এটা
the complementation and assimilation of different types of
রাম এটা
cultures
দেখে নিবি
in the
তুই
equal world communication based on
এটা
the
দেখে নিবি এটা
culture
কিছু নাই ও যা হবার হয়ে গেছে এটা
of relatively independent nations and countries. The trend of
থাক
cultural
এটা
globalization is driven by economic globalization. Cultural globalization means that the world culture is not simply made up of different national cultures, but the organic unity of cultures, national and cosmopolitan nature. So now the question is that what is culture? Culture is created by human beings to meet their own needs, to get rid of environmental control, and to achieve freedom. Therefore, the culture created by human beings should meet human needs, help human beings to get rid of environmental control, and achieve freedom. But it does not evolve in accordance with the motives and desires of the human beings who create it. The formation of cultural globalization is conducive to mutual understanding and communication among human beings and forming a common culture of human beings. But there is also a potential confrontation and conflict between different culture traditions of different nations. Meanwhile, globalization itself is an aggregation full of contradictions. It is a process of interlaced internationalizations and nationalizations, aggregations and marginalization, and also a complicated process. This is because cultural globalization largely reflects cultural hegemony. So, since globalization is fundamentally a new process of cultural integration based on economic action strategy, the final result is to be able to disintegrate any culture with special efforts of its own in a universal design, thus completing the universal perfection of the world cultural prosperity. If economic globalization is the inevitable trend of mankind, the formation of cultural monism is also a trend, but the reality of cultural pluralism cannot be denied. Uh, from the perspective of the relationship between the core concept of globalization and the internal structure of culture, it is found that culture exists and develops in a paradoxical way in the process of globalization. On the one hand, globalization has not changed the inherent structure of each national culture, and each national culture still exists and develops with its unique features. On the other hand, as human beings are facing more and more common problems, they will merge and recombine into a new type of culture, that is, world culture, which is accepted by all nations in the world through multicultural exchanges, dialogues, and coalitions. As two interactive aspects of cultural globalization, cultural diversification, coexistence, and monism trend not only lives with each other, they also influence and develop each other. Therefore, cultural globalization is just a process, and the formation of monoculture is only a trend. Globalization cannot be a complete westernization, nor will it be a domination of Western culture, but a new culture pattern formed by conflicts and dialogues among different cultures. Monism is relative, while multiculturalism is absolute. The formation of regional cultures is one example of multiculturalism, and regional culture itself is multiculturalism. Cultural diversity records the track and particularity of each nation's historical development, which is reflected not only among different cultures but also within the same culture. That is to say, even for the same civilization or cultural phenomenon, there can be divarication. So, uh, I can be conclude myself in a short way that in a word, the development of cultural globalization has obviously become a general trend, and no one can be immune from it. However, the academic circles hold different views on these issues of cultural globalization, the existence of cultural globalization, and the possibilities of cultural globalization. Some renowned scholars believe that some people in the West advocate cultural globalization, which is essentially to sell Western culture represented by the United States to the world. They also hold that culture as a method of acquiring and maintaining control over other countries is not obvious nor direct, yet quite effective. However, globalization and deglobalization are two sides of the same coin, not two paths. The establishment of a community of shared future for mankind is the only way forward for the development of the world today. The destiny of the world whole human race is bound together as never before, and it is impossible to completely separate different countries, nations, and cultures. Whether or not cultural globalization exists is important, but it is a reality that cultural conservatism has no market. It may be hard for cultural globalization to take shape, or even impossible according to facts, but people cannot therefore deny the mutual learning,
কাল থেকে আমার তো আগে
acceptance,
বেশি চাপ
and
ছিল না, সেখানে এখন
integration
ম্যানেজ
of
করছিলাম,
different
বেশিক্ষণ
cultures.
লাগেনি।
Thank you so
বারবার
much.
অফলাইনটা হয়ে যাচ্ছে, নাহলে কোনো অসুবিধাই নেই।
Thank you so much, Rubina. You have
আচ্ছা, এবার
you have excellently summed up whatever you were going to say. I would, if
My network issues is not good. My issues and a lot of
That's
problem are there.
absolutely understandable. I myself am suffering from network issues. Would anyone want to, ask any questions to the presenters?
And also my charges is going down, so please.
No, don't worry. That's
Sorry for
absolutely
the
fine.
inconvenience.
No, it's absolutely all right. So, anyone who wants to ask anything or has any comments to make about the presentations that you have heard? If not, do I sort of conclude the session? Saurav or Madhuri, should
Yes,
I?
ma'am.
All right. Thank you so much for the excellent papers that you have read out, and we will move on to the next session as per schedule.
Okay, so inundated with illuminating thoughts and views and presentations of all distinguished speakers, I am pretty sure that this session has explored many uncharted territories. And thank you to Dr. Shmuel Roy for chairing this session. Thank you, Dr. Samana Madhuri, for co-chairing this session. And thank you to all the participants and audience. And we'll be back tomorrow at 11:15 a.m. Thank you so much. And kindly fill in the feedback form, please. Okay, so we can leave.
Saurav, do I also fill in the feedback form?
I think, ma'am, yes.
Okay. No, because I have a paper also tomorrow, so whether I do it now or do it tomorrow itself.
It doesn't matter, madam. If you
all right. I'll do that.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. So we may leave.
Yes, of course, sure.
Okay,
we may leave.
Bye, everyone.
এখন কি হয়ে গেল? We may leave বলবে। আচ্ছা, এখন হয়। আচ্ছা, ইয়ে কে অভিজ্ঞতাকে বলছে ওই জিমের ছবি পাঠাতে। আচ্ছা, জিমের ছবিটা পাঠাতে বলছে। তুমি জিমে ঢুকেছো? আচ্ছা, জিমে হ্যাঁ এখন যাইনি, গেলে হয়। আচ্ছা, এসো আগে কথা বলছি, কিন্তু
সাজানোর জন্য সবাই গেল না করতে পারে।
আচ্ছা, আগে কথা বলছি।
থাক, এখন একটু ওয়েট কর। শেষ হয়ে গেল কি ফিনিশ হয়ে গেল কি?
সবাই সেটাই বলছে নাকি আমরা উই মে লেফট নাও। সবাই
একটু ওয়েট করে যা।
হ্যাঁ, একটু করছি। কারণকে ফোন লাগিয়ে দেবো কি? রিং হচ্ছে তো না, এটাই রে দাদা। না, এই নাম্বারটা হবে লাগবে। আচ্ছা, এবার লাগবে বললো তো মনে হচ্ছে। একটু ওইটা হবে সুইচ অফ। তোমারটা করে দাও, নাম্বারটা বলো আমাকে, আমি লিখছি। স্যারকে আমি ফোনটা লাগাচ্ছি, নাম্বারটা বলো না। আচ্ছা, তুমি লাগাই দাও। আজ মেন মাস স্যারগুলো তো পালিয়ে যাচ্ছে এবার।
পালিয়ে আসি আমার কমপ্লিট হয়ে গেল এটা তোমার কিছুই বাকি আছে তাড়াতাড়ি শেষ হয়ে গেল
check for others or maybe others so you will prefer others
না থামাতে হবে নাই মনে হচ্ছে আচ্ছা না আচ্ছা আচ্ছা সে আছে এই যেখানে
স্যার আপনি বেরিয়ে গেছেন নাকি ওই যে স্যার ইংলিশ স্ট্রিমের যেটা স্ট্রিমিংটা চলছিল সেটা থেকে যেটা মানে হ্যাঁ আই থিঙ্ক শেষ হয়ে গেছে সবাই লেফট করে যাচ্ছে স্যার তো বলবো ওখানে আচ্ছা
আচ্ছা আর অনেকে বেরিয়ে যাচ্ছে কি বন্ধ হতো জিজ্ঞাসা করেছো আচ্ছা আরো জয়েন করছি আমি না
এটা স্যার মিটিংটা শেষ হয়ে গেছে অলমোস্ট সবাই লেফট হয়ে গেছে এটা মিটিংটা নেক্সট স্ট্রিম এটা লেফট হয়ে গেছে হ্যাঁ
অনেকে লেফট হয়ে গেছে
সবাই লেফট হয়ে গেছে তাহলে এটা কি অফ করে দেওয়া যাবে অফ করে দিতে হবে না কি করব এখনো কয়েকজন আছে ম্যাডামকে ফোন করেছিলাম ম্যাডামকে ফোন করলেন
কোন ম্যাডাম ওই সামনে ম্যাডামকে
সামনা ম্যাডাম কি কোনো হোস্ট শেয়ার করছিলেন
তিনি গ্রুপে আছেন এখানে কি তার ফোনটা লাগাচ্ছি ফোনটা
ছিলেন আর সামানা ম্যাডাম ছিলেন
সৌরভ স্যার তো বেরিয়ে গেছে
তাহলে কি স্যারকে ফোন করবো
এসে লাগাচ্ছি লাগাচ্ছি
ওটাতে লাগবে নি ওটা হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ নাম্বার সুইচ অফ
আচ্ছা তাও ঠিক তোমার দেখো
এবার লাগবে স্যার আরেকটা নাম্বার আছে দেখ ম্যাডাম সেটা হচ্ছে 986
নাম্বারটা বলে দিই লাগাচ্ছি
তো সামানা ম্যাডাম ছিলেন তো
হ্যাঁ তিনি কথা বলছেন সৌরভ বাবু একটু আগে বললেন যে হ্যাঁ আই এম লিভিং নাও বলে চলে গেলেন
মিটিংটা করছিলেন তো মনে হচ্ছে
পলিগোস লেফট মিটিং করে বেড়াচ্ছে আরো
আছেন তারা হচ্ছে কনফারেন্স এখন তো রাউন্ড টেবিলে আছে তাহলে এটা মনে হচ্ছে এটা হবে না
আচ্ছা লেফট করে দিয়েছে সামন্ত ম্যাডাম সামন্ত ম্যাডাম
ঠিক আছে চলো
ক্যান্সেল করে দেবো এটা আচ্ছা লিভ
Thank you, Hamida Babu. The topic is exercise study on selective qualities, ability, and psychological parameters. Here presentation is
এই ল্যাপটপটা কোনো কাজ নেই এখন
আর
তো মিটিং লেফট হয়ে গেছে
হ্যাঁ তোমার সাথে ক্লাসটা
ইয়েটা অফ করে দিয়েছিল স্ট্রিমিংটা
স্ট্রিমিংটা অফ করিনি অফ করে দিচ্ছি
স্ট্রিমিংটা